Are we ready to begin?
Yes.
Then I will call this meeting of the External Relations Committee of Marta to order. I would first ask that we take roll for committee attendance.
Yes, sir. Roberta Abdul Salam. Avi Ash.
I'm present.
Stacey Blakely.
Present.
Jim Durrett. William Floyd.
Oh, I'm here.
Roderick Farrington. Brian Glover. Rita Hardage.
Present.
Russell McMurray. Al Pond.
Present.
Catherine Powers. Rita Scott.
Present.
Reginald Snyder.
Present.
Christopher Tomlinson. Thomas Worthy. We have 6 board members present.
All right. The first item on the agenda is approval of the January 21, 2021 External Relations Committee meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
This is Rita Hardage. I move to approve.
Al Pond, second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion of that motion, which is properly made and seconded? Hearing none, we will now vote. Are there any noes? Are there any abstentions? Hearing neither, the motion carries unanimously. The next item on the agenda is the resolution authorizing the solicitation of proposals for the procurement of transit and digital advertising, Rfpp 48265. Jennifer Wright, please, it's your turn.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Ash, Ms. Scott, Mr. Parker, and members of the External Relations Committee. My name is Jennifer Wright. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing and Sales. I'm here this morning to bring to you our transit advertising solicitation. Next slide, please. Just briefly, our office, the Office of Marketing and Sales, our overall functions are the general marketing and advertising for the authority. We also manage the customer communications, external events, any design needs that are required by the organization, as well as our digital channels, so our social media and our website, which we manage in partnership with technology. Under the office is also our revenue-generating sales programs, which are primarily discount programs where passes are sold directly to companies, to colleges and universities, as well as large conventions. We also have a business development function where we seek non-traditional ways to generate revenue for the organization, and we provide some contract oversight for those contracts. And the print shop is also part of our office. The print shop is our one-stop shop for all printing needs for the organization. Next slide, please. Our current contract that we have is a 5-year contract. It was from 2015 to 2019, and it had 2 one-year option years. We are currently in the last of the option years, so 2021 option year. The initial contract had a DBE goal of 25% of controllable expenses. As this contract is revenue generating, there are no costs associated to Marta, but we still have a DBE goal so that it is important to build those relationships. The current vendor, Outfront Media, exceeded that DBE goal at 38%. Under the contract, we sell all of our available space for advertising. So that includes all of our vehicles, our rolling stock, our buses, rail cars, as well as our mobility and streetcar vehicles. In addition, we sell our rail stations. The image that you see here is what we call station domination, which is where we sell all of the assets within the station just to one advertiser, so they can use the floors, the walls, the ceilings, anything to have a full brand experience in that particular station. We also added earlier last year some digital screens, which we call live boards. You may hopefully have seen those at Limburg, Buckhead, and the Georgia World Congress Center stations. Those are our new digital screens. Next slide, please. In our current contract, you'll see here what we call the minimum annual guarantee, or it's called the MAG. This is the amount that the vendor commits to paying us regardless of sales for each year of the contract. The way the contract is devised is we will either receive the MAG payment per month or 65% of the commission, whichever is the highest. So under this current contract, if we only received the MAG, the full term of the contract, we would receive $24.68 million. Next slide, please. We've had great success with our advertising contract, and you'll see looking at this slide that every single year we exceeded the MAG payment by over $1 million. The exception to that is last year, due to COVID and the impact it had on the advertising industry and many industries, including our own, which resulted in lower sales than expected. Prior to 2020, you'll see that our revenue earned was increasing each year, and it was on track to increase both in 2020 and in 2021 prior to COVID. Despite that, you'll see that we have, to date on this contract, we have earned just over $28 million, which again has exceeded the MAG that we would have received at $20.84 million. Next slide, please. So the MAG guarantee is one of the critical factors in this contract. And when we assess the options that come into us, the MAG will actually be 50% of the score. So it is a very important factor. We project the MAG to be $42 million, and we're basing that on our current contract. So it's an average of about $3.5 million per year. We anticipate that the MAGs for the first 2 years in 2020 and 2023 would be lower as a result of COVID-19, but then we expect future years that MAG would increase because we hope that by then the industry would have found its feet and be in a much better position. In the past, the MAG guarantees used to be very high, but in 2008 and 2009, both Outfront Media and Intersection, who are the primary vendors for most of the transit advertising contracts, experienced great losses. And since that time, they have been much more conservative on the MAG that they guarantee in a contract. They want to ensure that they will always be able to cover the MAG costs regardless of the industry or the climate. The way the MAG is generated is really looking at the assets that we have available, and then essentially the number of impressions for each of those assets, as well as the demographics. When they look at impressions, it is, of course, the number of people that will see a particular ad, but also how likely they are to see that ad. So, for example, if it is in a situation where people are stationary, waiting for a bus or a train, they have a higher possibility of seeing the ad, so it increases the visibility. Also, the larger the ad, the more it's visible. So all of those factors go into the impressions and then the demographics. When you look at our internal inventory, it is much more based on our ridership, so impressions and demographics of our ridership. But when you look at the external inventory, such as the outside of buses, that is much more on the traffic outside and just passers-by and people driving in cars. Next slide, please. In our future contract that we are coming to you to get permission to award, we have a few significant changes. One of those is the installation of 200 digital signs. In this image here, you'll see the current digital signs that we have, which are called live boards, which are at Buckhead, Limburg, and GWCC. This is 3 of the signs at our Buckhead station. As you can imagine, digital signs are the way of the future, and everything is moving towards digital. It allows for more advertisers to share a space. It allows for advertisers to have more flexible messaging, and it takes away the production costs and the installation time of the previous, the traditional paper ads. So we are asking this new vendor to install 200 signs. Of course, that would require some cost. We estimate that that could be between $5 to $6 million to put in these new digital signs. And so we have increased the contract term from the previous 5 years to 10 years to allow for this investment to be recovered for the vendor. Another element we are adding in light of COVID-19 is to have a clause that really addresses the MAG payment and how we would handle it if we had a similar situation to a COVID-19 or any event that seriously impacted our service or our system ridership level. So that would already be embedded into the final contract. Very excitingly, our new rail cars will be in place during the life of this contract. It is likely that by the time we get to the end of the contract, we will have all of our new rail cars in service. But there will be an extended period of time where we have both the old rail cars and the new rail cars, and this contract will be selling both revenue streams. We do anticipate that we would be able to sell our digital ads in our rail cars at a higher premium than we do currently, so we're very excited about that opportunity. Another new addition is our electric charging stations. We are currently in phase 1 of that contract, and we have 60 charging stations at 9 locations, and 6 of those are stations. And so we are also adding this new inventory to this contract so that we can hopefully increase our MAG and our revenue. Next slide, please. This is just an overview of the timeline. As I said, we are in the final year of the current contract, so it ends December 31st of this year. So we have quite an aggressive timeline. So coming to you here today, we'll be coming back to the full board in March, and the goal would be that we would, in October, come back for the contract award and then actually execute the contract in November to give the new vendor a time to be in place to take over any existing contracts and be ready to sell at space January the 1st of 2022. Next slide, please. Just to reiterate, we do have an advertising policy which really outlines the type of ads that we can accept on our system. We can accept, obviously, commercial ads. We also can accept ads that are, transit advocacy, anything that's around community, education, or health and safety, ads that are adopted by the Ad Council, by a government or a nonprofit. We do not allow any ads that would reflect negatively on our image or on our employees, or anything that is unsuitable to a young audience or in violation of any state or federal law. And we always do reserve the right to refuse an ad that we think would negatively impact our image or goodwill. Next slide, please. One of the topics that has come up over the years is bus wraps. Because bus wraps are so visible, it does seem like we have hundreds and hundreds of buses wrapped, but actually our contract limits it, and we can only have 75 bus wraps at any one time. We also do have some requirements around those wraps, but we are only allowed to cover the windows between the wheel well on the street side of the bus, and they need to be perforated so that people can see both inside and out. And there are no wraps that are allowed to cover the windows on the passenger entry-exit side of the bus. We have these requirements both for security as well as for our passenger visibility. We looked at 2019 revenue because we know 2020 has been impacted by COVID, and we looked at 2018. But using 2019 revenue as a base, we looked at the current 75 RAPs and the revenue of just over 1.5 million. Just to give some examples of ways that we could modify the contract if we wanted to reduce the number of RAPs, we looked at if we had 50 RAPs, 35 RAPs, or 25 RAPs. And if we had the same numbers as 2019, then what those numbers would look like. So if we reduced it to 50 RAPs, a reduction of 537,000. 35 RAPs, a reduction of 840,000, and 25 RAPs, a reduction of just over $1 million. We wanted to kind of look at those numbers as the board considers any modifications that we want to make to the contract. We are at liberty to reduce or remove any of the assets that we have available. They would all obviously have an impact on the MAG. Bus wraps are highly desirable because of their visibility factor. We sell bus wraps for an average of $3,500 for the space versus a bus king, which is the rectangle ads on the side of the buses. Those would be $450 for the space. So from a visibility impact, of course, the bus wraps are much more attractive. Next slide. That concludes my presentation. I'd like to open the floor for any questions or discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Janatu Wright. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Robbie Alpon, I've got a couple of questions.
Sure.
Good presentation. I do understand the expansion from 5 to 10 years and the basis for it, but I really have two questions. The first is straightforward. Contractually, after a certain number of years, if it's advantageous for Marta to terminate the contract, are there clauses that allow Marta out?
So Jennifer, if you want, I can respond to that. This is Liz.
Thank you, Liz.
There will be a termination provision in there, and usually it's if it's a termination for convenient, there may be certain costs associated with that termination if the vendor can show they have incurred costs that would have to be reimbursed. But yes, there would be a provision for early termination.
Okay. And the second question, I think the more important thought for myself is that when you, as a private company, you put in a proposal for a period of 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 years, it's very difficult to predict the future that far in advance. So a private company is going to basically put some contingencies in there. I just wonder, are we getting the best price long-term by extending that period of time? And again, I do understand to cover that upfront cost, but when you put together a number that you've got to live with for 10 years, there are a number of unknowns there.
Yes.
Mr. Pond, can I just weigh in on that? Because that's really the limitation that they'll give us is against the MAG, excuse me, Jennifer, and there is a great incentive because they are driving their own revenue if they exceed that MAG to drive up revenue. So there's no restriction in terms of how much revenue we get as long as they exceed the MAG. So I think we've protected ourselves against that issue largely. It's not a fixed price contract that they're estimating and entering into contract exactly what they will pay regardless of their performance.
With that threshold, I understand. Thank you.
Anybody else? Jennifer, I think in the briefing we talked about the relationship between this project and Avis. Can someone not the rental car company, obviously. Can someone fill the rest of the board in about the status of Avis, the audiovisual information system upgrade, and how these work in combination, and what rights we'd have to be able to use this new digital signage to push out emergency messages or other things as necessary when needed?
I can talk about the advertising component. So on this, in our current contract as well as our new contract, we do have access to all of the inventory. And you'll see, for example, now you'll see our track work messaging. You'll see that on the digital screens that we have. You'll see it on all of the assets inside of buses, etc. So we will still maintain that in our future contract as well. With the Avis signs, because of the size of the signs and the space that is allocated for advertising, when we looked at the market and how we could generate more revenue, that was where we determined that we needed to add the digital signs to this contract. The current live board signs, that are huge screens, are just so attractive to an advertiser from a visibility and impact perspective. So we decided to make that modification to this contract to allow us to generate a lot more revenue. On the Avis sign, we will use that space still, but we'll use it primarily for Marta self-promotion and messages to our customers. I would need to defer to technology or somebody else to talk about the Avis contract status.
Thank
Hi, Mr. Ash, this is Jonathan Hunt in legal.
That's
I've
Mr.
been working with capital programs on this contract. They have pegged, and it looks like we'll be wrapping up that contract in total this year and bringing Avis fully online, audio and visual. They're doing background network integration so that Avis works with all of our other systems when we do push emergency messages and the like. But at present, that project's on schedule.
Fantastic, thank you. Anybody else have anything else?
Yeah, Robbie, this is Reggie Snyder. I did have one question I wanted to ask about the, I understand that Marta's contract with the advertiser, we receive a minimum of either the MAG or I guess the commission, if that, whichever is higher. But I wanted to understand, what is the commission rate that we get?
Yes, it is 65%.
Okay, I got you. Okay, that was on there. I just wanted to be clear. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And as a heads up to my colleagues on the board, it's my recollection that there are really only two companies that do this. So we should expect to be picking between one of the two of them. Is that your expectation as well, Jennifer?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Chairman, can I just add one more point that we're going through a solicitation now. Jennifer did refer to a period in 2008 where the transit industry saw really a backlash with a cut in the MAGs just because of the market. And I think it's fair to anticipate that just the uncertainty with our ridership that we stand with now, right? So clearly these companies are going to look at our current ridership, potential, and that's going to be part of the equation a big part of the equation they use to calculate what that minimum guarantee is. So I think we all should be recognizing that there's a bit of instability in the pricing that we're likely to receive from largely these two vendors.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'll look forward to that, getting those numbers.
Thank you. Any other discussions of this item? If not, do I have a motion to approve?
Ms. Hardage, I move to approve.
Thank you.
Second, Rita Scott.
Thank you. The motion is properly made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we're ready to vote. Are there any abstentions? Are there any noes? Hearing neither, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. The next item on the
Thank you.
agenda is a briefing on non-standard bus shelter process. Ryan Van Sickle, please.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and Mr. Parker. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity this morning to provide some information about our non-standard bus shelter process. As you may know, this process allows a third party beside Marta and its advertising partners to install bus shelters at our bus stops. Next slide, please. So this morning's brief presentation will cover the purpose of this process, the roles and responsibilities when carrying it out, a little bit about the process itself, some of the key benefits that Marta realizes from having it, and then some examples from the last couple of years of where this has been implemented. Next slide, please. So Marta's non-standard shelter process essentially allows external parties to install bus shelters of various types at our stops. We're often approached by local governments or folks from the development community, property owners, neighborhood associations, and more, folks like community improvement districts who would like to have a shelter installed at a stop that does not meet Marta's criteria. Often this is a case of low ridership where there is a desire to have an improvement, but the ridership is simply far too low for us to have that stop on our priority list. Another thing that we're often asked about is design. And so this partnership also allows us or allows the requester to use alternative designs to our standard if they have strong aesthetic preferences. In particular, the development community has a lot of questions about that item. Next slide, please. So when carrying out the process, then the roles and responsibilities for Marta are first and foremost, we provide the terms and conditions for the process that kind of govern who does what. On Marta's side, we review the shelter designs for suitability and ADA compliance. So when the requester sends us their plans, we'll make sure that the shelter is located appropriately at the bus stop, things like making sure it's not too close to the curb where it may be subject to being struck by a mirror on the bus, and also making sure it's not blocking sight lines and things like that. We also do a check to ensure that the shelter is ADA compliant, both in how it's positioned at the bus stop and also the shelter design itself, ensuring that there's enough space for passengers with wheelchairs or other mobility devices. And then we're also able to provide some technical guidance and advice. A lot of the time, folks requesting to enter a non-standard process like this with us have no experience with bus stops or bus shelters, and don't even really know how to find out where to buy one, much less kind of the ins and outs of figuring out how to place it. On the requester side, of course, they are responsible for abiding by the terms and conditions, which include that they must submit their shelter plans to us for review. They're also responsible for securing permits, purchasing and constructing the shelter, and because it's a non-standard amenity, then they're responsible for maintaining it moving forward. That would include repairing damage or vandalism, cleaning the shelter, and managing litter and trash. Next slide, please. So walking through the process, this diagram has the two kind of black dots in the center of the items that Marta carries out. But the requester will submit their request to us and ask us about entering this non-standard shelter process. We respond with those terms and conditions and start the discussion to help them learn how they need to move forward. When they submit the plans, then we'll do the plan review and provide them back with any comments or needed revisions. And from there, the requester kind of takes it forward. They'll do the permitting and the construction. There's also kind of ongoing communication throughout. As they go through the process and have questions for us, then we're here to answer those questions and try to help them move things forward. Next slide, please. So of the 900 or so shelters in our system, we currently have about 56 non-standard shelters. You'll probably notice some clustering on this map, especially around Hapeville, Emory, Sandy Springs, Roswell, and Alpharetta. And the reason there is that those cities and organizations have done their own shelter programs. For example, there will be a one showing a Sandy Springs example in just a few slides. But they've taken it on themselves to do a area-wide upgrade of a shelter of their choice. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the key benefits of this process to MARTA are that it does allow shelters to be installed at stops that don't qualify for them under our criteria. And in doing this, it provides shelters at stops that are often important to MARTA's partners and members of the community. These shelters are provided to our passengers at no cost to MARTA, and it also allows requesters to select their own designs and pursue creative or artistic options. And last but not least, it is something that has helped us strengthen relationships at the bus stop level. Through this, we've gotten to know key contacts within the development community, within some of the neighborhoods, local government staff, and other neighbors of our bus stops who may be able to help us when we have some of those kind of small location-specific bus stop problems. So from here, then, I have a few recent examples to share. Next slide, please. So this example comes to us from the Glenwood Park area, where Avila Development was building a new apartment complex. The complex is actually adjacent to the future Beltline, and so they really wanted to encourage transit use immediately. And so they wanted to encourage residents to ride Route 107 Glenwood and approached us about installing a non-standard shelter. They picked this design that they felt fit the aesthetics of their building and their development, and it was installed just a few months ago. Next slide, please. Similarly, we had another example on the I-85 Northeast Expressway frontage road, where Children's Healthcare of Atlanta opened a new administrative center. As part of the transportation improvements, they wanted to upgrade the bus stop next to their parking deck and office building. And so they chose to purchase this off-the-shelf shelter that they liked to install at that bus shelter, or that bus stop. Next slide, please. Here's one of our municipal examples. Several years back, the city of Sandy Springs was planning a large streetscape project in the central City Springs part of Roswell Road. So they engaged a design firm to develop a custom bus shelter, the renderings shown at left, and the reality, the final product is shown at right. They installed these at, I think it was between 8 and 10 stops in that area. Sandy Springs is just one of several local governments who have done an effort like this. Next slide, please. And this, I'd like to close with one of our more artistic examples. This shelter was installed with a partnership between the Pillar Foundation and the City of Atlanta Planning Department. It's a custom one-of-a-kind shelter with some pretty unique features, including planters that form part of the shelter's backing. So it has its own greenery. It also has acrylic roof and back panels that were printed with leaf prints reflecting the neighborhood's tree canopy and local tree species. The city also installed a digital SUFA kiosk that kind of serves as a digital community message board. So this provides shelter to passengers in that area of Route 71. So thank you for your time. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? As I said, I think during the briefing, this bus stop question and how to either council members or developers get bus stops is certainly in the top 5 list of things I get asked about as a MARTA board member. So I'm glad for everybody else to get this briefing. Thank you for your work on it.
Mr. Chairman, this is Melissa. Can I offer one more comment, please?
Absolutely.
Okay. So we have the technical guidelines and the process document that city planning offices are aware of and can refer that way. But we're going to create on our website a place where people can sort of start the application process that way. And we'll be pushing that out much more frequently. We're making some upgrades in a number of ways to the website like that, right, where people can apply online for access to the stations for various events that they do, and that way you don't have to know who to call. You can go to the website and be directed that way.
Perfect, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If there's nothing else, then we will turn to the next item on the agenda, which is a briefing. The 2021 legislative update. Colleen Kiernan, please.
Good morning, Chairman Ash, Mr. Parker, members of the board, Ms. Mullinax. Thank you for having me this morning. I'm Colleen Kiernan, Senior Director for Government and Community Affairs. I'm here with the mid-legislative update. Next slide, please. So let's start on the federal side. Of course, a lot has changed since last we spoke about it. We have 2 new senators in Georgia. We're really optimistic. Both of them have been appointed to the Senate Banking Committee, and there are 5 subcommittees of that. The subcommittee assignments have not yet been made, but all of the FTA funding runs through that subcommittee, one of those 5 subcommittees. So it also deals with housing and other urban development. Looking at our House delegation, the map on the right is the House districts. So we have, I guess we'll start in the southwest part, Congressman David Scott representing the 13th district. So South Fulton County and the southern part of Clayton County has been promoted to the chairman of agriculture, which is a very powerful position. We have Congresswoman Nikema Williams, who's now representing Georgia's 5th district, which is mostly the heart of the city of Atlanta, the western side of DeKalb County and the north part of Clayton County. We have Congressman Hank Johnson representing the east side of DeKalb County, Congresswoman McBath in the 6th, the north part of DeKalb and North Fulton County, and then Congressman Loudermilk is 11. And then we have adjacent to our service district, Congresswoman Carolyn Bordeaux in Congress District 7. And the 3, Bordeaux, Williams, and Hank Johnson, are all members of the House Transportation and the T&I Committee, Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. So really good news on the federal level on all of our local representation. So some of the issues that we're keeping our eye on the federal level, of course, we've gotten already 2 rounds of COVID relief in the form of the CARES Act last April, and then I call it CARES 2 because it's a little bit easier, but there was a subsequent in late December, early January COVID relief bill, and there's one working its way through Congress now, which includes an additional $30 billion for transit, which will be great news for Marta if it passes. It's in the House now. It's expected to get through the House by the end of this month and through the Senate mid-March, probably. You're also probably well aware of the Biden administration and some of his transportation platform during the campaign cycle. Of course, we have our new Secretary of the Department of Transportation, Mayor Pete, and the new FTA administrator, who's well known to Marta Nuria Fernandez, who comes from the Valley Transit Authority in the Bay Area. So all of this is very good news for transit advocates and Marta and our sister agencies in Atlanta. The other 2 pieces that will be coming up are the FAST Act reauthorization. This is the surface transportation bill, which was set to expire last September, but got extended for a year. So that will be an interesting conversation. Of course, the main issue there is the Highway Trust Fund and keeping it solvent and where that money is going to come from, as well as additional stimulus money, maybe comparable to what the ARA Act, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act did in 2009, and the future of the Capital Improvement Grant Program, which is the major expansion program that FTA administers. Next slide, please. So turning our attention to our state legislature, we are about halfway through. We have a number of new leaders that we have been getting to know. We have the Marta chair. You might have seen in the news that it's Democrat Mary Margaret Oliver, who represents Decatur. This is the first time anyone can remember where a member of the opposite party served in a committee role in the legislature. So we're looking forward to working with her, and the committee members have recently been assigned. We also have a new House Transportation Chair, Rick Jaspers, from just northwest of us, who we've been getting to know a little bit. And then on the Senate side, we have a new Transportation Chair as well, Senator Frank Ginn, with, who Mr. Parker and I, Mr. Tomlinson got to spend some time with last night. So we're really looking forward to developing our relationships with all of those folks. The MARTA delegation chairs remain the same with the exception of the City of Atlanta. Representative Pat Gardner retired, and the new chair of the Atlanta delegation is Representative Betsy Holland. Next slide, please. So the major issue that we ended the last General Assembly that ended in June with was the beginning of dedicated transit funding from the state. This happened through a variety of circumstances that led to having an Uber and Lyft excise fee, which House Bill 105 intends to spend on transit. So we've been working through some of the details on that. Just yesterday, House Bill 511 was introduced, which is the dedication of the fees bill. You might remember there was a constitutional amendment on the ballot in November, which passed overwhelmingly. So this legislation dedicates the hazardous waste and the solid waste trust funds, for example, among others, including some of the transit fees. So we're still reading through and analyzing the legislation as it's been introduced. So look for more information on that. Next slide, please. So in thinking about what this, what this level of state investment could do for MARTA and our program of priority projects, we have many priorities, but we've thought about how what we want to do and what the state wants to do align, and how to really elevate that as far as making the case for a state investment in transit projects in the MARTA territory. So we're very well aware that Georgia is proud to call itself the #1 place to do business. And then we also really want to elevate the fact that MARTA has spent the last 9 years really strengthening its financial house and ability to be able to get these big projects done. Next slide, please. So looking at what the state economic development website is really pushing to entities that are being recruited to come to Georgia, there are 3 main areas that we see there being a good overlap. So those 3 are life in Georgia, buildings and sites, and infrastructure. Next slide, please. So in thinking about where MARTA's current infrastructure lines up well with that, the east-west line comes to mind as far as, an underutilized piece of infrastructure. So the idea here is, we're all very familiar with the north-south trunk line and the development that has happened, particularly on the north side of the red and gold line. And so we started thinking about what we could do on the east-west line. And so one of those things is to extend, so the green line serves Bankhead, and there's only a 2-car platform at Bankhead. So the biggest train we can run on the green line is a 2-car train. So so it's already part of the more MARTA program of projects to extend that platform to be able to accommodate a full 8-car train. So that's for each train that goes there right now can only carry a maximum of a little under 200 people. And with that renovation, we'll be able to carry close to 800 people on each train that goes to Bankhead. So this is a major, bang for the buck, so to speak. This is a piece of infrastructure that's already there. And then we started looking at where the sites which are right for economic development. So just to the northwest is Tilford Yard, which is a 300-acre site. So the synergies just became really apparent. So the 4 places that we're really want to talk to the state about where their investment could do the most good in alignment with their own goals are Bankhead, 5 Points, Kensington, and Indian Creek. So I'll go through those 4 in a little bit more detail. Next slide. Next slide, please. Start with Bankhead. So this orients you a little bit to Bankhead and is a little bit what I just talked about, but You might have seen last week that Microsoft just announced a major development in Quarry Yards, which is adjacent to Bankhead Station, and we could be providing a lot more service in terms of longer trains and having the Green Line go further east to Avondale to have more of a trunk line similar to the red and gold line that runs north and south. And this is also a site that's been identified for future transit-oriented development. Next slide, please. 5 Point Station. Next slide, please. Next on the list. So there are so many different proposals to redevelop areas in South Downtown. There's the Centennial Yards, Newport, Underground. There's over $6 billion of planned investment, and renovations at 5 Point Station can really, I think, accelerate the development that can happen there in alignment with what the state would like to see. There's a number of state assets nearby, including Georgia State, but also the office tower at GP Street Center and a parking deck right nearby. Next slide, please. So this is some of the conceptual ideas around what will happen at 5 Point Station. So the station will be much more of a plaza type atmosphere. This is planned to be done in preparation for the World Cup coming to Atlanta in 2026. And then the bottom picture shows the potential rendering of what could happen at 143 Alabama Street, which would also include better bus facilities that would make it better for customers and traffic in downtown Atlanta. Next slide, please. Moving out east to Kensington Station. Next slide. Of course, this is part of our station rehabilitation program that everybody is aware of. There are a few developments that are already moving forward in cooperation with the Housing Authority of DeKalb County. That triangle at the bottom in the yellow is in partnership is being developed with 250 senior and workforce housing units. And then Marta is underway with a master planning effort for the rest of that site. And there are potential development sites all around Kensington Station with great access to both Memorial Drive and Interstate 285. So a little investment we think will go a long way out there. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Finally, at Indian Creek, which is the end of the east line, we see there being a lot of future opportunities here. Of course, this is the first station up for station rehabilitation, and that is all moving forward. But in thinking about what's going on in a larger scale, you know, we have the GDOT Express lanes that are coming to the east wall, and so thinking through and getting ready for transit there. And then also we have this ramp that is shown in the picture on the right, which is GDOT owned, which could open up access to the Indian Creek site. And this is just one rendering of potential redevelopment that could happen in the area. So these are sort of our concepts and where we're going with where the state might make investments as they begin to more regularly invest in transit through the Uber and Lyft fee. So next slide, please. That concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kiernan. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Mr. Chairman, Bill Floyd.
Mr. Mayor.
I have a question and a comment. One is, this is all very interesting and incredible, I think, plan, or if you will, organization for the future. But I saw the other day where the mayors in North Fulton voted to not spend any more money on transit or something along those lines. Now, my question now is, shouldn't the vision or shouldn't the focus for Marta move to east-west across the north? We've got a group of cities that go all the way from Smyrna to Tucker that are very interested in some sort of connection. And it seems to me now, in light of what's about to happen at Bankhead, that a cross-county connection from Bankhead Station to Tucker along that north and east wall, if you will, that Marta ought to somehow, the board ought to somehow make some sort of commitment or statement that that's our preference now. And I know this gets a little out of your bailiwick, Colleen, but
right.
but I guess I'm asking the chairman, really, it seems to me that our discussion ought to change focus now. And I'm looking for a way to begin to discuss that and make some sort of commitment.
Well, I'm sure that the chair, as well as Mr. Parker and Ms. Mullinex, might have something to add here, but I will say that, so starting with the Bankhead Station, you know, the more Marta City of Atlanta funding is already ready to go, and that project is set to be delivered by 2025, I believe. So the idea here is that, you know, we'll be able to show results for state investment soon, and there are a ton more projects that warrant state funding in the long term. But, you know, as we're getting started, we want to be able to deliver and show real improvements so that the state feels good about continuing to make those investments. And the I-285 project is, you know, an excellent place that has a lot of, will help a lot of constituents of both us and everybody. But it's just not, you know, we won't be able to show anything for it for quite some time because it's pretty early on in the planning phase.
Add something, please, Mr. Chair.
Of course, Madam Chair.
I do believe Colleen and I spoke about initiatives at the state legislative session regarding initiatives and proposals from DeKalb County legislators. And I am actually working with them on putting this into a state funding request as well to make sure that some of those initiatives are realized earlier than we would without the state funding. And that would support parts of DeKalb County.
Excellent point, Ms. Scott.
Thank you very much. And
Chairman.
Bill, from my perspective on your comment, I mean, I certainly think it's, you know, something that merits further discussion by our board. You know, I know the decision was disappointing to many of us, particularly those of us who worked to negotiate a deal up there. But in terms of what comes next and what do we do next, I think that's probably it's a very important conversation, but it's, you know, a broader topic, which probably exceeds the scope of this committee meeting. But I appreciate you raising it.
Mr. Chairman, this is Melissa. If I could just add a couple of things.
Always.
Mr. Floyd, the conversations with Fulton, you know, you've read how they have gone and their decision. A lot of it is based on concerns about whether the T-SPLOST, which they all need desperately, would pass with the transit connection, you know, transit component. So it's really, as Robin said, for another conversation. But the conversation is not totally dead. We are having discussions with Roswell about their east-west interest and what we might be able to put together. I'm meeting today with the mayor of College Park. We're continuing conversations with mayors individually, and of course on the top end 285, there's an executive committee that's been put together that Mayor Ernst leads. Jeff is very engaged in that discussion with Mayor Ernst and Mayor Paul. So, you know, a lot more to come. But this presentation is really about, that Colleen just gave, was about the current projects that we have local funding for, and asking the state to match that, so that as we align with their priorities. So this presentation today was certainly not an exhaustive list of all of our projects. You know, you didn't see anything, for example, on Clayton about that, but that's not because that we're not moving those forward. It's just these things along the east-west line are particularly ripe for state support, we think.
Okay, I guess, Melissa, my question today is, when you look at extending Marta, you have to look at where funding might come from. And I know the mayors all the way from Smyrna to Tucker, and including Peachtree Corners and places like that, have talked for a long time about figuring out a way, because it doesn't look like we're going to get much help out of DeKalb County from a standpoint of more dollars. And I think those cities on the north part of DeKalb County, And certainly those that go all the way to Smyrna, to the Brave Stadium, and those others have met and have discussed with DOT and other ways about ways to solicit funding. And it seems to me that it might be appropriate for Marta to make some sort of commitment or statement or some sort of position, if you will. If North Fulton doesn't want the transit, let's take it somewhere where it is wanted. And I think we may be, I think we're missing a chance here, an opportunity to at least discuss this and make them begin to think about the fact that if we do go somewhere else, what does that mean to North Fulton?
Well, I mean, I think we all agree with that premise, but I don't think we're missing anything. We're fully engaged in these conversations. There are, yes, at least two new interesting ways of funding that top end 285.
Chairman,
So it's just not right now, I don't think.
What I want to share is that, I think one of the key messages and concerns that has come out of, the multiple conversations we've had with the Fulton mayors in conjunction with, the Fulton board members and Fulton County elected officials and staff is just this concern that a continued focus as sales tax being the singular way to fund transit is just simply not sufficient, and at least in the opinions of some in North Fulton, and I suspect in other places, that it's not likely to be as successful as the needs for funding of transit improvements are required to move forward the economic vitality of this region. If you talk to the CEO of DeKalb County, he points out that the importance of the BRT along 285, a major benefit from his perspective is connecting parts of DeKalb County where income tends to be lower and housing is less expensive than in the area of North Fulton, where there's a lot of high paid jobs. So it's an important part of connecting people to jobs and allowing people to live in more affordable parts of the of our region, be able to access those high paying jobs so I think mayors, we've discussed before, and you continue to raise this important point that we've got to continue to talk about additional ways, which are not just more referendums that we do have on the table, and we do have legal authority with the support of of the counties to levy additional tax, and then enter into an agreement with Marta where appropriate. So we're going to continue to discuss that, continue to look at options. I know the latest meeting on 285, the mayors brought up some interesting and innovative concepts that I think need to be considered. And it's going to take layers of funding sources. And I think the important piece here is that if we look around this country where successful referendums are happening, it's not just the singular approach to funding transit. It's really layers of funding which allow these transformational transit projects to support, access to jobs and economic development and all of those things that are important to both the people and the economy of the region.
Thanks, Jeff. And I think my point, if I have one, is first of all that I think if we're gonna move this conversation forward, this board and this committee needs to put together some sort of program or plan about how that discussion is going to be played out. I mean, we need to have some sort of vision, if you will, about where the conversation comes from. It doesn't just take advantage of opportunities, it creates opportunities. And I think that discussion is paramount to Marta's future in the region. So I guess I'm suggesting to you and to the chairman that we need to see some sort of plan about how we're going to discuss this. If we don't bring this stuff up, if Marta doesn't bring this stuff up, it's probably not going to come up. Okay? And I think that discussion is certainly an external affairs issue for Marta, but I guess my point is I'd like to see some sort of, I mean, I know I brought this up for a while, but I'd like to see some sort of plan or program about how this discussion is going to play out over the next year or two, because I know it's a long-term thing. All right. I don't understand. We're not going to make these changes tomorrow. And the states, I understand that. But I understand if we don't start this discussion, if Marta doesn't start this discussion about all that stuff that we've talked about in the past, it's probably not going to happen.
Okay.
May I piggyback on Mayor Floyd's comments? I first of all, I don't think this is an either or choice. I don't think the question is, do we continue to pursue or try and get the deal we had with North Fulton implemented versus pursuing east-west mobility? I think those are complementary efforts. I mean, certainly if we had some way of unlocking east-west and making it more viable, you probably get Rusty Paul and Sandy Springs more interested in north-south as well. But I want to point out that mayors, I do think we should have a strategic conversation about how do we pursue east-west, and that we should focus on that. I would add to the mix that it's not just the mayors along those communities. After the 2020 general election, we now have radically different composition of the Gwinnett County Commission and the Cobb County Commission. And so I would encourage us to think about including those stakeholders in the mix as well. And remembering that one of the options we have, because of the Marta amendment, that we have not yet, that we did pursue in the city of Atlanta to do the More Marta project, but have not used elsewhere in the region, is the opportunity to do sub-county taxation districts, such that, for instance, if you wanted a tax district in Cobb County that included parts of Cobb County but excluded others, or similarly in Gwinnett, that would be an opportunity to have that conversation. And since those are kind of the anchors of East and West, then I think that's an important. They're important stakeholders to add to that mix as well.
Well, I agree with you, Robbie, completely. But I think my only point is I want to see some sort of, for simple-minded people like me, I want to see some sort of plan about how we begin this how we intensify this conversation and the responsibility of the board.
How about for the March External Affairs Committee, we will lay out what we have already been doing and where we are on the top end, because we have, both planning and external affairs, law department and the GM, of course, have been engaged in this conversation, and we can certainly have this conversation and begin it in March with the board.
Yeah, and I think it would be helpful if, particularly for those of us who are expansion minded, you might want to preview that for us in advance so that we can more intelligently push that conversation at the External Relations Committee.
Okay, yep, we can do that.
Yeah, Melissa, I understand you guys are much smarter how to go about this than I am, and I'm not beginning to understand how it is. I just want to see the conversation begin, and that's what I'm getting at. So thanks.
Absolutely.
Is there any more business to come before the External Relations Committee today? Anyone? Anyone?
Mr. Chair.
Mr.
Chris
Tomlinson.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Beating a dead horse, I just wanted to echo one or two comments. One,
one you just recently made. These are not mutually exclusive conversations. There's multiple projects and multiple things we need to talk about. To echo what Melissa said, there are conversations happening on all these projects. So look forward to the next set of discussions where we may have this as a focal point. And then 3, and my final attempt at making glue on the horse, the T-SPLOS discussion is one particular notion or aspect concept of solicitation. It's not the only one that's being discussed in Fulton or anywhere else for that matter. So just wanted to, I guess, be on the record with those comments.
Chris, it would seem to me that your group, the board down there with you, is the place to start this. When you start talking about different methods of funding transit, that your board certainly ought to be actively involved in this.
Agreed. And I would say it's more than the boards, it's also the organizations. And I can say with complete confidence that myself, Jeff, Russell McMurray, and therefore our organization have been working and in ongoing conversations on multiple projects. It's dangerous if we start breaking this down to an either or on these. But Bill, to your point, there are certain opportunities coming up at the federal level that we all need to look at and make sure we're in the best position to move forward on these projects. I just don't want anyone it's an either or proposition.
Okay, I guess I came across as an either or. I guess maybe I saw the opportunity to say to the mayors of North Fulton, look, if you don't want us, we find somewhere else to go. But I do agree that I do know that running transit into North Fulton is important. So I understand, I think, that that part of it.
And I can't resist the urge to add just a reminder that as we talk about priorities across the region, not to forget that the city of Atlanta was the jurisdiction that most recently stepped up and increased its own funding, such that it not be punished for having done the right thing by being left out of the search for federal funding, for new federal funding, I should say. We want to reward good behavior like additional local investment, not discourage it. But we don't need to beat that horse. Speaking of horses that have taken some abuse over the years, anymore on this call.
Due to low
Anybody
bandwidth,
else?
I don't have. Due to low bandwidth, I don't have my video on. But for Robbie, I'm nodding. Yes. Always is helpful.
All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn and encourage members not to vote with their feet, but by clicking the little red X at the bottom of your screen. Bye, y'all.
Bye, thanks.